Hey everybody, it's Kiana. Welcome back to a new episode of She Ventures Out, the show where we explore bold moves, big shifts, and transformative journeys that hopefully shape us for the better. Today's guest is someone who knows a thing or two about turning their passion into purpose and doing it in a way that leaves a lasting impact. So today I am joined by Bo Chilton, who is the CEO of Impact Community Action. And if y'all remember, there was an episode where I talked about having a CEO friend who was listening to the episodes of She Ventures Out from the lens of how to keep people in his organization. And that's Bo. So I'm super excited to have him on today because we are going to talk about a range of things. So we are certainly going to talk about culture and the things that not only he's taken from She Ventures Out and applied to his organization, but also just how he thinks about organizational culture. We'll talk about also leadership. Bo is one of those leaders who just really moves from a place of empowerment, vulnerability, all of those good things that we all want in the leaders that we work for. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So, if you are at the crossroads of trying to determine what's next for you, how to turn your passion into purpose, and how to just be an amazing leader, this is the episode that you've been waiting for. So, hey, Bo.
Hey, Kiana. I am so excited to be here. I've been listening to the show for so long and wondering when was I going to get my shot for He Ventures Out.
Well, Joe and I were talking, as you know, you are our first male guest on the show. So we are super excited about that. And it's actually timely because I was having a coffee conversation with a young man the other day. We were talking about career, and he said, "When are you going to do a He Ventures Out?" And so I said, "Stay tuned." And here we are.
I am him.
That is okay, so let's jump right in. So I want you to talk, for our listeners, like let's start at the beginning. Like what was that moment when you decide that serving your community was your calling?
Yeah, so I will say I thought about this, and there was a defining moment where I was clear that I want to be a servant leader and serve the community. It was a conversation that I had with Charlita Tavares when I first became her legislative aide. So I want to tell you about that conversation because
Please.
that's when I decided, yes, this is what I want to do with my life. But before that, there were a couple of moments that shaped me. The very first, I will say, was my sophomore year when I was in geometry, and there was a student trying to explain to the teacher why he wasn't getting something. And he just didn't have the right language to articulate where the disconnect was, and he started to give up. I could see where he was missing it. And maybe it's because I'm dyslexic, so I have to really think through my thought process, but I could see it and I was able to articulate it and explain it to the teacher in a way that the student now got it. And I remember the student getting excited, like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so I realized that I had a gift for education and teaching, and that maybe my disability, dyslexia, was actually an ability, a superpower that I was able to see things that others might not.
Wow, that's
So
awesome.
that was one point. The second was when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X my junior year. That's when I would say I first became conscious, like consciously aware and moving through life a little differently. But it was the conversation with Charlita Tavares when I was at the time working on my PhD in educational technology and was working full time at the university as an academic counselor and a technology coordinator. I had a great situation because the work that I was doing as a technology coordinator, which was about half of my time, I was working on projects that I was actually working on in my PhD and vice versa. So it
Okay.
worked out well. Got to go to school for free. And I was working full time. I had a great situation. But I had an opportunity to meet with Charlita Tavares. She told me she had this legislative position. And I went and met with her out of respect. But I had no intentions. And I let her know at the outset, I said, I really don't see myself as a politician. I don't believe in making behind closed door deals and all of these things. I'm not going to sacrifice my principles. And she was like,
Oh,
my
you were laying it
goodness.
down exactly.
She said, I don't consider myself a politician by that definition either. She said, I consider myself a public servant who's able to influence the policies that impact our community. And she said, what better way to serve our community than being proactive versus reactive and being a day late and a dollar short? We talked for like 2 hours, and I was like, wow. I was like, I gotta work with this lady. She
Oh,
is such a
wow.
powerful woman. And I asked her, I said, well, can I continue with my PhD if I take this position? She said, oh, sure. But anybody that knows Charlene and how she rolls, she had me all over this city. I mean, that's what she said. She was like, wherever I can't be, I want you to be. And I remember a friend
Mm.
saying, boy, you got this thing down. I see you everywhere. He's like, but I notice you always come a little late and you leave a little early. That's because I was hopping all around this place, but it was such a great experience. I loved it, and it's what really set me up for my career. And what I began to realize, because prior to that, I had been a middle school teacher, a high school teacher. I had worked at the university level in the role that I told you about. So I've worked with students at every level, from middle school through college. And I am very passionate about education. But what I realize as a nonprofit leader is that I am still an educator, but in a classroom without walls.
I love that. I want to go back to something in your conversation with Charlita, because I mean, actually, that's where we met. You were in her legislative role at that point in time. So I didn't even realize that you had a whole career before that. So that's awesome. But I love the fact that you came in there with a certain belief, right? And she helped shift that, right? Like,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of times, right, like that's kind of the moment of getting unstuck, right, is when somebody says something that shifts something for us. And so she
Mm.
essentially shifted the way that you thought about what it meant to be a politician, what it meant to be in politics. So how has that shift kind of carried forward for you?
It really reminded me that we have to be open minded. And so the term I've heard, and I just saw it as a book cover, it said, don't believe everything that you think. We have thoughts that are based on a lot of different assumptions, perceptions, misperceptions. So at least be willing to stay open minded. I'm a person that believes in passion and conviction. I lead with that. So this is how I operate based on what I know today, but I remain open minded to new ideas and ways of doing things, because at the end of the day, I want to be effective,
Yeah.
and I want to get things done. And I hope that it's going to be transformative and live long beyond me. So
Yeah.
open mindedness is the key.
I love that. Well, and the show is all about, pivoting, leaping, and that's what you did. So talk to somebody about who, is contemplating doing a similar thing, right? It's contemplating navigating a leap. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, I believe in taking the leap of faith. There are times in my career where I had to do it. I'll tell you, one of the most, I think, toughest decisions I had to make was after my junior year of college. Had gone to college. I remember watching this commercial from the UNCF where they had this person on a bus leaving, going to college, and then with his bags coming back. And I remember my dad teasing me saying, I hope that's not you.
Mm,
But then I got to college and I struggled a little bit. And a lot of that dealt with identity and things because of my environment. And ultimately, I had to make a decision about what I was going to do. And I ended up dropping out of college after 3 years, enrolling in the military, enlisting in the military. And I could tell you that was the wake up call I needed, because I got my stuff together and moved forward. But what I take from that is you have to be willing to take a leap of faith. But you also, before you take that leap, look before you leap. And what I mean by that is you got to have a game plan. You can't just jump out there on a leap of faith on hope, wishes, and prayers. You actually have to do the work, do your research, but don't limit your potential. And so it's really about finding your passion, your purpose, and then turning that into something that you can earn a living from.
yeah. Well, and I know, and you know this too. There are a lot of people who will say, I aspire to do work like you're doing. I want to be in a nonprofit. I want to be in a role that's really allowing me to help people. But I get nervous about, government funding for sure right now, but
Mm,
grants, all of this type of stuff. So, talk about how you balance this idea of purpose with practicality.
yeah, boy, it's a tough one, and it's ever evolving. We have seen some highs and some lows here at Impact. We are, for those who don't know, the successor to Kamako. Kamako was the community action organization that served this community since 1964 to about 2004, 2005, where they fell on some hard times and actually ended up going bankrupt. And really, it was because they had some catastrophic illnesses, and the medical claims were not approved by the carrier. So it fell back onto the agency, and they had to declare bankruptcy. But when you talk about balancing that passion and practicality, um, you know, we came in, when I came in, we were a $6 million organization with about 70 employees. And throughout my 17-year career, the height of where we kind of grew to was just in 2022. We received a lot of emergency assistance for the pandemic relief. And so by 2022, we were at a $90 million budget with 150 staff members. And so we had to ride that wave of scaling up and increasing our capacity, and then realizing that those dollars would go away and having to scale back down. So being practical means being planful.
Yeah.
We had a plan for how we would scale up and how we would scale back down. And so we executed on that plan. However, what we're seeing today with this federal administration is something different than anything else that we've ever experienced before. And so the best that we can do is we're constantly communicating and doing scenario planning and things of that nature. But what I will say is outside of this particular situation, we've actually had a pretty stable funding source, even with all of the government grants that we receive for really the last 64 years.
Yeah.
We've had some bureaucratic disruptions here or there, changes in administration, but it's been fairly stable. So I would say, if you have a passion to serve the community and you are interested in nonprofit work, I can tell you there is no better feeling than knowing that you're earning your living by actually improving the lives and empowering other people. It's the same feeling I got as a teacher when that light bulb goes off for the student. Like, I love that feeling.
Yeah. Well, and I think the, other thing that, you know, f- that I would pull from what you're saying is that there's volatility in any industry, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we see companies every single day, who are laying folks off. And so, I think it's a misnomer to think that, nonprofit, entities, are any more volatile than, a publicly held, company.
That's a great call out
Yeah.
because we've seen for-profit corporations lay people off even when they've had
Exactly.
record breaking profits. So
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So when you think about kind of this, move to, kind of really aligning your career with your passion, what would you say is the most surprising part?
The most surprising part, I'm gonna take a counter view. What
Okay.
surprises me the most is people who are interested in pursuing their passion, but don't really reflect on if it aligns with their values.
Mm,
So for us, core values is something that we emphasize. I actually, with every staff member that we onboard, we go over the core values, and I'm the one who does that at the onboarding session because we tell them, to work here, this is mission centered work. We want people who believe in our vision and our mission. And our very first core value is we make impact. And then we have key behaviors underneath that. And the very first one is it's bigger than me. If you're going to work here, you're committed to a cause greater than yourself, and you understand that. Because we do workforce development. So for anybody that's just looking for a job, we can help you find a job. But if you're working here, then it means that you're committed to the mission and the vision, and that you're not just going through the motions. That you are here to make an impact and you understand you're committed to a cause greater than yourself. So what surprises me, I would say, is when people don't really do that analysis. And sometimes we chase money. And I'm not judging anyone because depending on your situation, you got to do what you got to do. But if you have the opportunity to really take the time to reflect on your passion, your purpose, and wanting to live that out, I say you got to find a way to pursue it somehow, some way, but it has to happen in a very planful kind of way.
Okay. All right. Love that. And I love the fact that the CEO is the one imparting the values during onboarding. I mean, that has to truly send a powerful message to your employees. And I think that that's a great segue into talking about culture, right? And the type of culture that you're building or have built at Impact. And I did it in the tee up, right? So you're my CEO friend who said, I'm listening to understand how to, make my organization sticky to make people want to stay. So, what have you learned in your tenure as a CEO around what keeps people in organizations?
Yeah. So I used to have a coach, a professional coach named Norm Shub from the Business of People. And one of the things he would say is, are you a developer of people or a driver of work? Sometimes we can get so focused on the outcomes, production, driving the work. You lose sight of, people want to be engaged. They want to be developed. We talk about, meeting people where they are. That's the first principle I learned as a teacher. Meet people where they are and then challenge and support them in developmentally appropriate ways. Any environment that's too challenging, people will shut down. Any environment that's overly supportive and not challenging enough, people will not grow. Yeah. So we try and find that balance between challenge and support and developing people. So as an educator, again, I told you I'm in a classroom without walls. So developing the next generation of leaders, I see as one of my North Stars. I want to make sure that this next generation of leaders are prepared for the challenges of the future. And those challenges are changing rapidly. But I want to do all that I can. And so one of the things I pride myself on here at Impact is, we may not always have a space for someone to grow internally to their highest level of potential. But I want to do all that I can to help them get to that next level. And I tell them, even if that means growing and then going out to another organization so that you can continue to grow. And that's something I take pride in because I have at least 5 people who have come through this organization who are now CEOs of other nonprofits.
Oh, wow.
And the people who are here know that I'm committed to their development, their growth. Even hoping that we'll find a few people that could be considered successors as I look to move on in the next 2 to 3 years when I venture out again. And so really just taking care of your people. And the thing that I would say to Norm is a developer of people or a driver of work is not an either or proposition.
Yeah.
You really have to do both.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that you said made me think. I remember, I was in a leadership position at an organization. I was kind of doing these listening sessions, and I remember one of the employees said to me, "Are you going? Are you here to drive the needs of the organization, or are you here to support the people?" And, one of the things I said to her was, I feel like those aren't mutually exclusive, right?
Right.
And so I would love to hear how you think about that, right? How you think about balancing the needs of mission with the needs of the people in your organization.
Yeah, so man, I'll tell you, during the pandemic, we struggled with this a little bit, because attitudes about work, expectancy around work-life balance, all of those things shifted. Which is why I was so interested in your show, because it really talks about, people understanding their worth and, navigating their careers, and looking for the signs of if you're in a supportive developmental place or not. And that's where I took from the things that you were given as tips and what I was hearing from other people. I said, employers can benefit from that, because it's not only the staff and employees who have adapted, but employers need to adapt.
Right.
So you have some great advice. For me, what I've realized is, especially during the pandemic, people were going through some really tough times with their families, but we still had a job to do. We were declared essential services, so we've never shut down. During the pandemic, we've always been open. We were down at eviction court, making sure people didn't get evicted. We served over 40,000 people and distributed $135 million over a 4-year period to keep people safe in their homes. But the thing that really stood out was, at a certain point, we started slacking on our performance. And we were trying to be understanding and flexible with our employees, but we were not finding the proper balance. So the term that we came up with in 23, and we really started focusing in on, is supportive accountability.
Okay.
So we wanted to be supportive, and we talked about what that support is, and we dialed it up, and we communicated, ways in which we could support people individually, but we still had to have accountability.
Yeah.
Because we have an obligation to the community, who are counting on us. And so that was the way in which we tried to strike the balance.
And so, how did that manifest, right? What does supportive accountability look like?
Yeah. So part of what it looks like is we have a Zen room now, for people to take those breaks. We have Walking Wednesdays. We have TED Talk Tuesdays. We have a health coach. For those, unfortunately, based on income eligibility, some of the people who work here are also eligible for assistance.
Yeah.
And so where they were eligible, we assisted with them. I wanted to make sure that we take care of our own, because part of our core values is we treat everyone with dignity and respect. And one of our key behaviors is I take care of myself and others. And we say you can't take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself. In order for you to remain resilient, you have to be able to rejuvenate. So that's a lot of the ways in which supportive accountability shows up. But we also had to get a little bit better with our processes. So having scorecards, making sure that everyone's on the same page with where we are, and then intervening and knowing that it's all hands on deck. So that's another one of our core values. One of the key behaviors under it is we're all in. And so that means rallying when other departments or programs need our support.
Yeah. You know what, Bo? One of the things that I really appreciate in you as a leader is you talk about being kind of a teacher in a classroom without walls. But what I'm also hearing is that you also are a learner, right?
Mm,
And you are looking around, seeing what's happening, figuring out where you need to shift, and so learning as you go as a leader as well. And I think to be a great learner, right, you have to be willing to be vulnerable, right? You have to be willing to say, this isn't working, even though it's something that I put forward, or, opening yourself up to hearing others. So I'd love to hear kind of how the role that you think vulnerability plays in being a leader and how you embody that as a CEO.
yeah. Well, I believe that the best teachers are students first. So you're always learning. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. I learned as much about teaching from my students as I did anywhere else. if nothing else, how to communicate and how to be effective. I learned how to become a better teacher by engaging and learning from my students. So the best students or the best teachers are students first, always wanting to learn. And for me, so it goes back to our core values. So our four core values are we make impact, we treat everyone with dignity and respect, we take pride and ownership in our work, and we keep it real. That last one, that was, and we did this as an all staff. We all decided on the language, the verbiage. The we keep it real was the one that made me a little nervous because I remember the Dave Chappelle show when keeping it real goes wrong. And I said, okay, well, let's put some definition around what we mean when we say we keep it real, because I don't want that to be weaponized where people are saying, well, in the spirit of keeping it real, let me tell you about yourself. I was like, nah,
Been
that's
there.
not what we're doing. I
Exactly.
was like, when we say we keep it real, we say it starts with we are open-minded,
Hmm.
that we lean in on the crucial conversations, and that we do that with warmth and respect. Um, I remember having a friend who said, oh, I keep it real. He was like, I'll cut somebody's head off. And I was like, he was like, I believe in being brutally honest. And I was like, I was like, you
Yeah.
can be honest without being brutal. So
Exactly.
communicating truth, but with warmth and respect, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to get to the same place of serving our community. And so for me as a leader, that starts with I see strength and vulnerability. And what that requires is you got to be willing to check your ego at the door, because, and that again goes back to our core values. The very first key behaviors is bigger than me. Understand that you're
Mhm.
committed to a cause greater than yourself. That means it's not about you and your ego. If somebody comes to the table with a better idea and you got greater buy-in, then that's what we're going with. I believe in the wisdom of the collective.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm going to push you on this a little bit because there are a lot of CEOs who are in organizations who have lofty organizational values, right? They're on the wall, so on and so forth. And if you go and talk to the employees of those organizations, they'll tell you every single day that CEO isn't transparent, they're not vulnerable, right? They're not living our values, right? So there's something else kind of inside of you, right? There's something else that motivates you to say this is the kind of leader I want to be, right? Because this is who you were before you came to Impact, right? You
Mm-hmm.
were a leader who empowered others. You were a leader who, saw value in the collective. So where do you think that comes from?
It really comes from my parents, because they've always been open, honest, and I try and operate that same way. I've been blessed to work with mentors and leaders who also operate in that same way. Charlita being one. I remember somebody coming and wanting to give her a campaign donation, and we're there in the office. And that's usually not heard of. And so
Okay.
she said, you deal with my people and all of that. But she said, before you even give me that donation, she said, I want you to understand, I'm always going to vote my conscience, and I'm going to do what I believe is in the best interest of our community. She said, if you're writing a donation because you support that, great. She was like, but if she's like, I just want to be clear, if you're thinking that this is going to influence my decision on this vote that we got for zoning, I just want you to be clear, it will not. And of
Mhm.
course they backed up. Oh no, it's not that. But we knew what they were doing. But I looked at that and I said to her, I said, well, Charlene, you and I had already talked about this. You were going to vote for that anyway. Why say that to that person?
Mm,
And she said, because I have to be able to sleep at night and I want everyone to be
mm,
clear about where I stand. I took that, and that was a powerful lesson for me because I was at a crossroads back in 2010 after we had received a lot of funding from the ARPA, because we were on the recession. President Obama had come into office. We received a lot of funding for our weatherization program. It quadrupled. And then in a couple of years, we had to shrink back down. And there was a question about how much notice should we give employees to let them know we weren't going to be able to continue with them, and we were going to go through this process. And some people said, man, we got to wait and just give them the 2 weeks, because they were concerned about sabotage, that people would be upset. And I said, nah, I don't feel good about that. I said, I want to give people as much notice as possible. So we gave them at least 3 or 4 months. I mean, we knew that we wouldn't. We gave them a lot of time. And people appreciated that, and they responded professionally. They said, you know what? I've been places where they just say, hey, pack up your stuff, you're out. But you took the time so that we can prepare. And they appreciated that. And I said, you know what? And there might have been 1 or 2 who acted up. But at the end of the day, I said, I'd rather live with the risk in doing the right thing versus operating outside of who we are and our values. So for me, it becomes very easy. You know, if I have to deal with the consequences of trying to do the right thing, and it comes back on us, I can live with that. But not doing the right thing and not being able to sleep at night, I'd rather just not live my life that way.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that, when you talked about, creating a culture where, people can grow and develop, but also, potentially, even if that's not internal to the organization, we know that there are retention issues, right? COVID heightened them, right? Where, folks felt like, they could, truly decide, if this organization aligns with my values, I'm going to stay. And if they don't, right, like I'm going to find somewhere else. And
Yeah.
so when you think about, creating an environment where people feel seen, where they feel valued, where they feel like they belong, what are the specific things that you're doing as the leader of impact to ensure that that's the type of environment you have?
Yeah. And the first thing that I said, well, first, I introduced the core values to every employee as part of their orientation so that they know that this is something that from the top to the bottom we believe in. Um, being a former English teacher, I share with them that I love vocabulary. And so when we look at the word respect, it's the one thing that's in our core values twice. We treat everyone with dignity and respect. We speak with warmth and respect. The etymology of the word respect, spec coming from spectacle, meaning to look, read, to do it again. So in essence, respect means to look again, to actually see people, and look beneath the surface. We talk about a lot of times the people who come through our doors. Most of them are hardworking people who are just struggling to make ends meet, and oftentimes feel invisible, as if people do not see them, they're not hearing them. And we want to make sure that we provide hope, inspiring help, and real opportunities for self-sufficiency. And that starts with letting them know we see you, we hear you. And so that goes a long way with just hearing people. Now, we can't always solve all of their problems, and sometimes people are frustrated. But we always ask that our staff treat everyone with dignity and respect, and that we practice that here. The thing that I do tell some employees coming in, I was like, our goals or our core values are aspirational, and we try and live up to them. And sometimes we fall short. But those are the times when we need to have crucial conversations and say, hey, how is this behavior or these actions consistent with our core values and who we are? And when they're not, we need to be able to have that crucial conversation.
For sure. Bo, I think that you've done a really nice job of kind of explaining like the foundation that you're setting or that have set, right? Because you've been in your role for some time. But you also mentioned, right, thinking about what's next. And so, when I think about, a lot of nonprofit leaders, right, they're in the role for, a long time and then they leave and, the organization begins to look very different or the legacy isn't as solid. And so, how are you thinking about, kind of, creating programs and services in an organization, right, that lives beyond you?
Yeah. I think for organizations that have leaders who are those powerful, charismatic leaders who get things done and then they leave and the organization falls apart, I honestly view that as a failure of leadership. Because what that tells me is that the organization was totally dependent on that one or two charismatic leaders and could not sustain beyond them. So they didn't have the infrastructure and the leadership development to be able to sustain long term. So part of how I think we should judge all leaders of organizations is how strong is the organization when you left it, and is it in a position to continue to thrive? So that's an important piece for me in terms of the legacy piece, and it can't be, again, about ego. I talk about that. I think a lot of people will describe me as a humble person. I'll be honest, I'm not. But I do work on it. I pray
Okay,
about it.
okay, okay.
But my hero, and you'll see one of my paintings back here, is Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
I used to talk trash, and then my mother told me, if you're the best, you don't have to go around telling everybody.
You said,
They'll
but
let you
Muhammad
know.
Ali is.
Yeah, exactly. He's the greatest. That's right.
Well, okay, so I would have absolutely described you as humble, as having tons of humility and how you lead. And so, I love the fact that you're saying, I'm working on that, right? I really am the Muhammad Ali of the nonprofit sector, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's what me and the listeners heard.
That's right. That's
That's
right.
right. So, but how are you, like, like, if you have other CEOs who are listening right now, right? How do you build that sustainability, right? Because to your point about ego, right?
Mhm.
Like, folks don't want to be replaced until they're ready to be replaced, right?
Yeah,
And so there's a balance of, doing those things that you're talking about. So, how do you go about that?
yeah. Well, first thing that I recommend to everyone is never make yourself irreplaceable. Never make yourself irreplaceable, because to the organization, if someone is dependent on you being in the role that you're in, they're not going to actively want to promote you and help you grow as a leader.
Yeah.
So make sure that you always have things in place so that you can make that transition. So the example I will give is when I first started as the director of the African American Male Initiative at the Columbus Urban League. I was in that role after having left my role as legislative analyst for Charlita for City Council. And I was only in that role for a year. But, we created the fatherhood program and a number of programs that exist today. But I can remember there were a number of stakeholders who had influence on that role, because this was something that was created by then Mayor Mike Coleman and Kevin Boyce, who was on City Council at the time. So this was their initiative, and I interviewed for it. That was an interesting, because I did not seek that position,
Mm-hmm.
but your boy ventured out,
Yep.
and it was a
Yep.
great experience. I have to tell you about that. But I remember going into that position, and then when the opportunity came to come here to Impact, I had only been in my role for a year, and there were a number of people who were saying, hey, I would be a great candidate. And I had to go to those stakeholders, especially Mayor Coleman, and I said, I'd like to move into this other role. And what I gave him was, here is a plan for what we have done and what we need to continue to do over the next year. Here are the resumes of 5 other people who I think can step into this job. I ranked ordered them. And because he asked me, he was like, well, what about my initiative? And he also let me know, he's like, I could block you, right? But I was like, yeah, I know you can.
That's why we're talking.
Yeah, that's why we're
Yeah.
talking. I gave him a plan. So, one, not make myself irreplaceable. So, how am I doing that now? I'm doing that by pouring into other leaders. I don't want to breed any sense of entitlement for anyone, but I do want, there's a couple people who know that I'm, mentoring them with intentionalities that they might be able to be a successor. Two, Chad Jester said something that was pretty powerful to me a number of years ago. He said, Chad Jester works for Nationwide over their foundation. And he said, Bo, we know you, but we don't know your organization. And I said, man, that's a problem. That's a problem. And so I've been very intentional about getting my senior leadership out there so that people see them, they connect them with impact. They know that we have a strong leadership team, and that if any one person were to leave, we're just going to keep it moving.
Yeah. Next man up
So
mentality, right?
yes, I
Yeah.
believe in distributed leadership. The power shouldn't rest all at the top, but it should be distributed throughout the organization. And I believe that most of the leaders here feel empowered
Yeah.
to make decisions.
Well, and I think that that's another example, right, of vulnerability and humility, right? So you have a major funder who's, giving you this feedback, right? A lot of leaders, could have said, why does he want to know my team? Why do they want to know my team, right? They know me, right?
Yeah.
That's who they interact with, right? But again, right, it was an opportunity for you to shine some light on other people, right?
Mhm.
And you chose to do that. And I think that this is an important lesson for other leaders, right? Like, bringing other people into the light doesn't take away from you. And then the other thing that you said that I think is important is, you were working on a project for the then mayor and a member of city council, and another opportunity came available, and you leverage one of those relationships, right? Like, you wanted to make sure that the mayor understood that, though you were seeking another opportunity, right, his counsel, his advice, whatever you want to call it, mattered. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the importance of maintaining relationships, right, as you continue to, grow, move up in your leadership, right? Because a lot of people
Man,
can look at you and say, I mean, you're at the pinnacle,
mm,
right? Yeah.
that's fake news. But I will say that that is, I think, something that is underappreciated and not talked about enough, is just checking in with some folks, getting their buy-in. I get that, people want to go out, do it their way, and the proverb is, you want to go fast, go by yourself. You want to go far, go together. We're much better off going and checking in and just saying, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's a plan I have. I'd love to have your support and your advice. Sometimes you get a couple little nuggets from people. Now they have investment and they want to see you be
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
So then, you go out to do what you're doing and you got people and you can check back in like, hey, that really worked.
Yeah.
Now people are really vested in your success. So that's the one thing I would say to young professionals, especially, because a lot of times we think, oh, this old guard is holding all the power and positions. They're not, bringing us along. And they feel like we got to go get their blessing. They're the gatekeepers. And really, you might be able to do it without that blessing and that gatekeeper, but why make it harder than it has to be?
Yeah.
Why not have them on your side versus kind of sneak dissing?
Well, exactly. And it's funny. So Audra was on the last episode who, so Audra Bohannon, and she said the same thing, right? She said that there's not a professional decision that she makes in a vacuum. She said she always bounces it off of someone else, right? Because you only know what you know,
Right.
right? And, getting somebody else's input doesn't take away your power to make the final decision.
Not at all. Not at all. It is, man, I've been trying to give my kids that advice, and I say, take it. Because like he has built this relationship with one of the deans of the school. And, when he needs something, he'll, ask of it. I said, but check in with them when you don't need anything, or go ask them for their advice on something, do it, and then check back in, because now you're strengthening that relationship
Yeah.
and that buy-in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to your point too, right? Like, people get excited. Like you said, once you give them the update, right? Like, they're excited that they were able to have even a small part in, wherever you're headed.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So now
Absolutely.
you've talked a little bit about kind of what, you know, kind of next looks, for the organization, but talk about your own leadership legacy, how you're thinking specifically around, what's next for you once you make the decision in, the next 2 to 3 years to leave Impact.
Yeah, so I'm not definitive yet. So that's the exciting and scary part. So all of the things that your listeners are going through, I'm going to be going through over the next 2 years, which is why I also said send me some information on coaching because I might need some coaching on that. And let me say a piece about that too, because I know you had Audra Bohannon on there. I happen to chair the African American Leadership Academy, where we really are committed to developing the next generation of leaders. And we talk about we want them to do well so that they can do more good.
Yeah.
And so all of those things are important. And Audra Bohannon, who I know you interviewed, we call her affectionately Auntie Audra,
Yeah.
always talks about efficacy being not only your power to produce an effect, but it is the highest return on your investment of time and effort. And really, we got to say effective
Yeah.
effort. So you can become really good at something with effective effort. But the effort in it being effective is what is most critical. It requires a tenacious engagement with what you're trying to do. It requires a commitment and receiving failure as feedback. Okay, it's not about my ability, but this is about, okay, I didn't score as high as I wanted to or test as well as I wanted to. Let me come back and do this more effectively. That's where coaching comes in. So even Michael Jordan, who is considered the greatest player, and I think LeBron's on his heels right now, but Michael
Here we
Jordan,
go.
who's currently the greatest player of all time, said that he was a better player because of Phil Jackson,
Yeah.
his coach. So that's why I just want to put a plug in for coaching
Yes,
as a
we
way for
appreciate that.
effective effort. So for me personally, I'm doing all of the things to make sure that we set up our organization to be successful. And so we're doing succession planning, not only with leadership, but also with the board. Making sure that we're going to have the right people in place when this transition happens. And so for me, I'm using these next 2 years to really test out some of my passions. One, I love leadership development and I love education. So I'm doing more leadership development and workshops here at Impact with our staff, testing out what really works and, where improvements need to be made. In the 17 years that I've been working in nonprofit leadership, I've also served as on the boards of several nonprofits. So I'm on the board of Aspire, the workforce board. I'm on Homeport's board. I'm on CIE, which is the Community Information Exchange. And then, of course, African American Leadership Academy. And so I've been able to see leadership both at the governance level, board level, as well as a CEO and had director roles. So have a pretty good grasp of what it takes to be a successful nonprofit leader. And so have some interest in consulting.
Yeah.
In coaching. As I said, I've always seen myself as a educator in a classroom without walls. So those are some areas where I'm kind of testing those things out and doing a little bit here and there. I had a couple of coaching clients and testing those out. And then one of the other things that I'm very interested in is affordable housing. As we know, we have an affordable housing crisis here in Central Ohio. We are fortunate to be co-developer with Woda Cooper on a project called the Enclave on Main. We built 102 units of affordable housing in Whitehall, and it should be ready for a kind of a open house
Oh,
coming up here in
wow.
March. So I'll let you know about
Oh,
that.
yes, that's very exciting.
And then we have an application in to redevelop the downtown YMCA, again in partnership with Woda Cooper. So we're waiting to hear about the tax credits, if we get them from OFA. And if we do, we'll be moving forward. That's a project that makes me excited and nervous. And
Yes,
nervous.
yes. Well, yes, yes. Well, anything outside comfort zone makes us a little nervous, but that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, so I love this foundation that you are setting for, kind of what's next for you. And so when you think about, advice, right, to somebody who is thinking about transitioning, right, who is struggling with knowing when to move on, be it a job, a project, a relationship, whatever, right? Like I think that you have like a really nice blueprint. So like what would you say to that person?
Yeah. So for one, it's about timing, and as I talked about, I believe in the leap of faith, but look before you leap. So having a plan. For me, timing wise, my daughter graduates from high school next June, not this June, but
Congrats.
June. Yeah. So in a year and a half, and so I'll be an empty nester. So I won't have those obligations kind of holding me. So that leaves me open to new opportunity and willing to take some chances that, when I got a family that I'm raising and bills to make sure I pay, I may be a little less risky. So for me, timing was key, and then having a plan. I'm working on that plan now because I told you about a few areas where I have interest, and I'm doing
Right.
some dibbling and some dabbling in those areas. I'm building affordable housing now. I'm learning a lot about that and trying to test out, is this something I could see as my next chapter? And so it's really developing a concrete plan. And then once you have those thoughts and ideas, just kind of working on them, that's when, again, you go and check in with other seasoned people who have done that. My mother used to say, I don't have to get hit by a Mack truck to know that it hurts. Some lessons should not have to be learned the hard
Exactly.
way. And
Exactly.
I'll tell you, when my career accelerated is when I really understood that point, that I can cut down my learning curve if I go and talk to seasoned people who have already been here, done that. Like, I want to learn, what were the lessons you learned, both good and bad. I don't want
Listen.
to make the same mistakes that you made, and I want to learn about the things that worked. And so,
Well, and some of that too, when you say is, being open to that, right? Like you
you gotta be
talked
open.
about earlier, right? Like, a lot of younger people sometimes just, don't feel like, like they need the advice or, they want to forge on their own. So some of that is you got to be open to it.
That's absolutely. The two biggest pieces of advice I give young people is, one, listen to what people say, but watch what they do.
Mm,
Actions speak louder than words. Even people who have great intentions, you just got to kind of watch what they do and, adjust accordingly. But the second big thing is, you got to be open to feedback. Everyone has blind spots. And I take that as different than weaknesses. I don't like
absolutely.
weaknesses. I like areas of growth. But blind spots are things that you cannot see. The only way you can become aware of a blind spot is by someone sharing feedback with you. And, by the time you've heard that two or three times, you got to say, even if I don't agree with what this perception, there's something to it because I'm hearing it from more than one person. But you'll never hear that if you're not open to it. And I can
Right.
tell you, the way that this city works, people give a lot of what I call soft support. Like, they will say all the right things and be like, oh man, this is so great. I love what you're doing and this, that, and the other, but then won't do anything. And
Mm,
sometimes it's something that could be solved, but no one's ever sat there and told you. But again, how do you show up? Are you presenting yourself as someone who wants that feedback, who wants to learn, and will not take it personally?
right.
So, yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, before we get you out of here, where can people connect with you?
They can connect with me. Are you saying me personally or Impact?
Yeah, however, so LinkedIn, the
Oh, yeah.
website, yeah.
Oh, LinkedIn. You could always find me on LinkedIn. Of course, I'm on Facebook, but social media, not as much. Um, but my email is the best way.
Okay.
bchilton at impactca.org.
Awesome. Well, Bo, we have loved this conversation. Or I have loved the conversation. I keep talking about the show in the plural. So I have loved this conversation. This was awesome. And for our listeners, thank you for joining me as always. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep venturing out. See you soon, everyone.
Foxland Media. Think big.